Greetings and welcome to the broadcast. It's kind of been interesting as we go through and think about innovation and we think about how leaders and how companies go through the process of innovation, how they innovate, how they come up with ideas. We've really thought about it from the standpoint of a process, and that's been our focus. And that process is three things: it's intelligence, gathering, organizing, and distributing knowledge. Really important, really important. And in that part of the process, that intelligence part of the process, it's important not only to gather the knowledge we need, but to filter the knowledge that we don't need out. And that's really important part of it, but it's only 1/3 of the innovation process. The second part of that process is design, and that's understanding what we need to create and how we need to create it. The ability to take a challenge, understand it, and to design something that meets the needs of the challenge that we're facing, be it a product, be it a program of diversity, be it some organizational initiative. That's important. Design, how we do that, is the second part of that process. Well, in this broadcast, we're going to focus on what I think is one of the more important ones. They're all important, but this one's really important and really interesting because I think sometimes it is the ugly duckling of the three. It's the one that I think motivational speakers, it's the one that professors and business leaders don't really like to talk about that much. And that's choice. It's investment. It's an interesting topic because companies have capacity limits. That's an amazing thing. And it's something that's not really talked about very often, is the fact that many times a company can't do everything. We can't pursue every idea. We can't pursue every initiative. And more importantly, some of our resources may be tied up, and we may have to free up those resources to chase the new idea. Isn't that interesting? That companies can come up with great ideas. They can know that a chain of logic has changed, it's shifted, and we need to go after this new marketplace. There's all kind of opportunity for us, but we can't do it because our resources are locked into other things. This happens more often than you think, and it's troublesome. It keeps companies from innovating. Let me give you a little bit of data behind this because it's really interesting when you think about it. One of the things that I became really interested in is not so much how companies come up with great ideas, and I'm certainly interested in that and wrote a book about it, and I'm still fascinated by that. But I also wondered, why do some organizations, why do some leaders fail? Why do they not see the opportunity? Why was the opportunity missed? Why did they not change course? And it's funny, going into that research, I thought to myself, well, surely it is just being blind to the opportunity. That must be it. It's not rational for a leader or for an organization to know there's an opportunity out there and not pursue it. Surely that cannot be it. It just had to be the fog of war. It had to be the distractions. It had to be that the opportunity was so disguised, it was so camouflaged that the organization just didn't see it. And that's what I thought. And I was wrong. Surprisingly, I was wrong. The more I interviewed executives who had missed opportunities. So these are executives that had been the head of a corporation, and I can give you some of those names. Nortel, that missed the whole, really the whole data revolution. They just missed it, totally missed it. Hewlett Packard, and other companies that just missed the opportunity. And I thought to myself, well, it has to be something rational, but I was wrong. I've interviewed 123 executives, and 123 of them have told me we knew. We knew the opportunity. It was interesting. Former CEO of Nortel, he tells me that, yes, we knew Cisco was moving in this direction. We knew that they had these products. We knew that they were going to change the marketplace, but we just couldn't unlock investment to meet them in the new frontier. And that was a common theme. And so what it told me is that contrary to a lot of consulting work out there and a lot of motivational speakers, companies can come up with great ideas and still not be innovative. That's a paradox, isn't it? It's something that you wouldn't believe. And the reason they can't be innovative is because they can't move the investment. Their money, their time, their best people are locked into other businesses, and they can't free themselves up to chase the new endeavor. So that's where we're going to start our conversation tonight. How can we as a leader, how can we as an organization, if we're part of a larger organization, how can we objectively and productively assess how we're investing our money, our resources, and how can we identify what the next opportunity is out there? So that's what we're going to talk about tonight. I'm going to show you a useful tool that you can use, you can take with you to assess almost any asset, almost any initiative, almost anything that you want to. But it's the last leg of innovation, choice. We choose to vote some old ideas off the island so that we can make room for the new ideas. It's the hardest part of innovation. So without further ado, let's go to tonight's visuals and tonight's presentation and take a look at this phenomena. It's interesting. And you know, I think it's also going to be fun. It's going to be something that I think you'll see and really be intrigued by. I'm still intrigued by it. But the name of the game tonight and the thing that we're going to talk about is called investment triage. It's the idea that in order to make room in the organization for new ideas, sometimes we're going to have to vote old ideas off the island. It's very, very tough to do. Very, very hard to do. So let's take a look at organizations in context. And this really sort of gives you a visual of how an organization exists and how that organization might need to change. So again, I hope you're seeing here that this is a real extension of the chains of logic. Something new happens, we have to chase a new outcome. We have to find new metrics. We have to find a new compass to chase those outcomes. But more than that, we're going to have to reorganize. We're going to have to think differently about our organization. So take a look at this visual. If you take a look at any organization, be it a church, be it the world's leading enterprises, be it a nonprofit, it doesn't matter. It's an organization. It really consists of three things, any organization. And this is old organizational theory, but it's really useful in the context of innovation. It's really useful when you get into the idea of how technology changes these things. So let's just focus on the right-hand part of the visual here in the three circles, people, process, and technology. Now, the way I like to think about this is that an organization will have a certain profile, a certain setup. You will be organized for competition in a certain way using these three things: people, process, and technology. The people we hire, the people that we think are important in our organization, the roles that they play. We're going to see in the next broadcast that understanding the roles that people play are very important. The technology. And the technology are the things that help us do business every day. The digital equipment that we use, the computers, the manufacturing equipment, whether we own that manufacturing equipment or whether we outsource it. That's all technology. So technology is, to me, is transformation. It's how we get raw materials into products, or it's how we get our know-how into the form of the service. Whatever causes that conversion or that transformation, we can call that technology. So don't think of it just as bells and whistles and computers. Think of technology as transformation or conversion. Sometimes I like to think of it as conversion. Whatever turns raw material into our final product, that's our technology profile. Process. These are our systems of management, our systems of reporting. This is our organizing principles. I also like to think of it as our beliefs, our values. That's our process. It's how we do things. And if you put these three things together, people, process, and technology, it's how an organization competes. It's our blueprint. It's our game plan. To go back to our technology conversations, it's our DNA, and it's recognizable. And I'm sure for you, it's recognizable. I'm sure that you could go into one organization and say, "Hey, they had one profile. They had one system for doing things from people, process, and technology." And another organization may have something totally different. There's nothing wrong with this, but you want those three circles to be optimized for the challenges that you're facing and for the markets that you are competing in, for the things that you want to accomplish. And of course, I'm going to go ahead and say it again. What we're hoping to do is chase honorable profit. That's a term that I love. It's how I reconciled some of the professors that I had who said it's just profit, 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 honorable profit. We're making honorable profit, doing honorable things, helping people, creating a better world around us. To me, that's how I like to think about the business world. Well, take a look at the left. What goes and creates havoc or creates mayhem for us are new technology, processes, people, and ideas. And notice how that creates an explosion in an organization. The reason it creates friction, the reason it creates disarray or creates mayhem is that suddenly our blueprint, our DNA, is not adequate for the opportunities that are out there. Now, organizations can make a lot of choices in this. We can say, well, we need to find a new recruiting strategy. We need to find people who understand this new world, this new frontier. We need to bring them into the organization. We need to find new technology. We need to find new processes. That is a very tough conversation for an organization to have. It's very tough. And so the organizational response typically is to resist the new technology, to hope it goes away, to hope that maybe the condition changes and it won't be necessary to adopt anything new. Now, you've heard this story before when we talked about chains of logic. Here, it's a little bit of a different context. In this context, the organization is not willing to put money into the new things. And instead, they will put money into the old things. You double down on things that have worked in the past. So now we've shifted the conversation not to so much the DNA of an organization, but how you change that DNA through investment. Now, I'll give you a pearl of wisdom here. In my consulting career and in my career in research, I have seen a lot of presentations by organizations about their strategy. And I think strategy is a wonderful thing. It's certainly something when I was working through my PhD that I was very fascinated with, and I'm still fascinated with strategy. But after these years of research and after all of the things that I've seen, I believe that strategy really melts down to one thing. It's how an organization spends their money, how you apply your resources. Many times I'm shown a presentation by an organization about their strategy. We hope to be a world leading organization in whatever it is they're competing in. We hope to be number one in our marketplace. You hear all of this stuff, and I will always politely listen, and I will take notes and hear what they're saying, but then I'll ask them the question, and then I'll make a statement. Would you show me how you're investing? And then I'll tell you what your strategy is. And I really think if you can remember that, strategy is not a mystery. It's not a series of important decisions. It's how companies ultimately spend their money, how any organization spends their money. So let's dive into that just a little bit. If you think of an organization as something that has suffered a shock, and you think about how that organization will react, certainly one of the most common reactions is to just keep all projects, to keep all initiatives, to keep all products, all locations, all identities. We're going to keep everything for too long. If you do this, it results in a crowded house. And you can see this in the statement at the top left-hand side of this particular visual. There's little room for new ideas, new initiatives, and there's a lack of clear focus. Now, here's the reason. Every organization has some finite capacity. We can't do all things. And so if we keep everything that we have, it's hard to make room for something new. And the middle statement really captures the whole notion here. Everything is important, therefore, nothing is important. As a leader, I want to urge you, never fall into the trap of thinking that everything is important. There are underperforming assets in every organization. There are products that the organization should have left behind years ago. There are technologies that no longer serve us well, and we need to leave them behind. It's hard to do. It's certainly easier for us to sit here in the calm of a discussion between you and I and talk about that. It's a lot harder in the fog of war, when competition is heavy, when the stakes are high, and when the cost of a mistake is perceived to be drastic. It's tougher in that context. But you can't be a good leader. You can't be in a good organization if you can't leave things behind that no longer perform well. It's tough. So the challenge for organizations is to practice investment triage. New initiatives have to be prioritized, and initiatives that no longer perform need to be left behind. Here's the key. The initiatives that are left behind, the products that we get out of, the technologies that we discard, these free up money for us. And that's what you move into your new investments, into your new projects, your new ideas. It's impossible to do that if all that investment is locked up. And I think this is going to become really important in the future. It's been important for a long time, but I think for today's leaders, it's a bigger imperative because things change faster and they change more dramatically. And that's to me an exciting environment. It is, but that environment requires a lot of thought, and it requires a lot of tough investment decisions. So what we don't want to do as an organization is suffer from the crowded house. We can't leave anything behind. Everything's important. Therefore, we have no room in the boat or no room in the house for anything new. And we just hope that we're going to be okay. And I heard a professor years ago talk about hope as a strategy. And I kind of laughed that off, but on the drive home after the class, I thought about it. And I said, I've seen that before. Now that I'm aware of it, I know that, and I understand that. And I think sometimes that's what organizations do. Rather than make tough investment decisions, we just hope they will go away. We'll kick the can down the road. It's hard to do. So, what to do about it? That's where we're going next. What good organizations are able to do is they're able to accomplish what I call investment triage. Now, in the book that I wrote about innovative organizations, this was something that you saw all the time. It was something that they did this with an ease that non-innovative organizations could never accomplish. And to me, it was amazing. And I'll have to say, in my career, in working with some of the companies that I've worked with, and not just researching, I have been a part of these companies, part of these research organizations. It has fallen into my hands from time to time to have to make the tough decision of deciding that we need to cut one project so that we can make room for the project that really looks good. It's a tough thing to do. So let me show you how it's done. A way to do this in a structured way. The last thing you want to do is to make such decisions without any data and without any context. When you have tough decisions to make, when there are challenges before you, what you need is a process. You need a tool or a technique so that you can build consensus. And in our next broadcast, I'm going to talk a lot about how organizations really depend on good consensus. Whenever there are tough decisions, you want to be able to get the input of the smartest people in the organization. And the smartest people sometimes aren't those that will speak up in a meeting. What we want to do is involve them in a process. If we can get a lot of insightful and intelligent people involved in a process, we're going to extract from them some form of consensus, or at least get some form of commitment around a new strategy or a new way of doing things. This is a technique to accomplish that. This is one that I use with a lot of organizations. I wrote about it in the book. It may be the most popular technique that I've been a part of and, for lack of a better term, invented in my career. So let's take a look at what investment triage is. Investment triage, again, solves the crowded house problem. We are going to determine how we invest. We're going to determine if there are projects that we need to vote off the island. Are there projects that we need to lower our investment in because they're no longer performing like they used to? And are there projects or products that are in the future that may not give us the kind of return that we want right now, but in the future they're going to be really important, and we need to start investing in them right now? And are there projects that are giving us exceptional return, and we need to make sure that we keep investing in those projects? That's what we're trying to do. So let's go in and take a look at the mechanics of the exercise. I will walk you through the grids, and then I'll show you an example. And I think you'll see how valuable the technique is. Let's take a look, as usual, at our grid lines here. Let's go from the vertical axis first. What we can do if we're trying to play investment triage is we can ask ourselves, what is the strategic importance today of the asset, of the product, of the skill, of anything? Now, the first thing that I want you to notice here is it's not just restricted to looking at products. Now, in our example, a little while down the road here, we will look at offerings and products, but I have used this matrix to assess cities for a real estate brokerage firm. I've used it to assess things that people do when they're not working, entertainment and leisure activities. I did that for the Walt Disney Company. You can look at technologies. If you're an IT person, you can go in and classify the technologies of an organization. You can put organizational processes in there. You could put customers in there. So the thing that I want you to see, this matrix has utility for a lot of things. The name of the game here is to get a discussion going, to get the conversation going so that we can start to build towards some plan of action, something that helps us reposition more favorably for the challenges that we're facing. So the vertical axis asks the question, what is the strategic importance today of whatever it is that we're trying to categorize? Again, going back to the real estate brokerage firm, they wanted me to categorize cities. Now, you have to define strategic importance. So here, if I'm working with a client, I'll ask them, what is strategic importance to you? What does it mean? And in the example for the mortgage brokerage firm, and again, this was commercial real estate, what they were looking at was the existence of colleges and universities in the city, the quality of life in the city, the secondary educational infrastructure within the city, transportation within the city. So what they were able to do is say, look, a good city has these 12 or 13 characteristics. So we can rate any city today on those and decide whether they're of low strategic importance today or high strategic importance. Well, that's only half the assessment here. Take a look at the horizontal axis. What is the strategic importance tomorrow of the city, of the information technology, of the product, of the customers, whatever it is you want to categorize? And we can measure that low and we can measure that high. Now, a word of warning here. We can apply analytics and we can apply some metrics here. And I think that gives us some foundation for at least understanding what strategic importance is. But we don't want to make this exercise purely mechanical. In fact, it's typically not because you're talking about what you think might happen in the future. So when we're looking at that horizontal axis, we're talking about the strategic importance, not literally tomorrow, but in the future. How will that occur? Or how will that look in the future? So let's go through and take a look at each grid here very, very quickly. And then we'll put it into context of what it all means in terms of investment. First of all, if you have a product, a process, a technology, customer, in the case of cities, a city that has low strategic importance today and low strategic importance in the future, it's a legacy. Now notice here the description, traditional products, projects that no longer yield strategic advantage, yet they may form the core of legacy operations. So we're not saying that it's bad to have legacy products. It's not bad to have legacy customers. It's not bad, but those products, those customers aren't really yielding what we would call exceptional strategic advantage. And in fact, some of them may be yielding less advantageous advantage to us, or they may be underperforming or not even performing at all, or are negatively performing. The key here is we don't want to have everything in legacy. That is really dangerous. One of the things we could say here is that if we just looked at a company's products and a group of senior executives assessed those products and said, look, everything we've got is legacy, well, right away, straight away, we can say that that organization is not very innovative. It would be very easy to do that. We could say, well, they're just not innovative. And yet, here's an interesting thing. For many organizations, it's true. For many organizations, they don't have a lot of products that are anything but legacy. You could still make money, but you're going to be working in commodity markets, and you're going to be playing the volume game. So this is a real interesting grid. Yes, there are legacy products, there are legacy assets, there are legacy technologies that we may want to vote off the grid. They are typically found in this legacy box. We also want to understand how much the legacy products are costing us. How much does it cost us to service a legacy customer? Perhaps we have a customer that's been with us for since the beginning, uh, yet we don't really get a lot of profit in that particular business arrangement, and that customer is high maintenance. That would be a legacy customer. We might want to continue being a part of that a business arrangement with that customer, but we also may want to say, look, we're not going to spend that much to service that customer or to be in that business arrangement. So that's the legacy box. It's a troublesome box. Again, in the organizations that I consult with, we try to assign a dollar value to that box. How much does it cost us to have that technology in that box? And what kind of return is it giving us? Certainly, any organization that has a dominant legacy box is not very innovative. Not very good. Now, again, going back to our technology discussion again, we can see that, you know, certainly there are legacy technologies that might be replaced by some of the 7 technologies and combinations of the 7 technologies that we talked about way back in the 7 technologies conversation. Certainly, there are some manufacturing technologies in 3D printing that are going to replace legacy manufacturing technologies. There are going to be robotic and automated types of manufacturing types of technologies that are going to replace some traditional legacy manufacturing. Amazingly, it's hard for companies to get out of those legacy products. So it's an interesting grid. I'd say it's the less exciting of the 3 grids, but it's really important to make an honest assessment of that. Here's an interesting one, falling stars. This is a technology, a product, customer, whatever you want to categorize, that has high strategic importance today, but look what happens in the future. Not as important tomorrow. These are really tough because companies don't want to believe that products that are performing well today may not perform well in the future. Going back to what I was talking about earlier in the broadcast, it was really amazing to talk to senior executives from the company Nortel, and they really knew that they had products in Falling Star. They knew that Cisco was coming up with new products that were going to replace their products. They knew that the market was changing. They knew that, but they couldn't move the investment. And when I say they knew that, they knew it, but they just didn't know that that change was going to happen so fast. They didn't think that customers would move that fast, but they did. Falling stars are troublesome because organizations tend to overinvest in them and they tend to glamorize them. You really fall in love with a falling star because they're performing so well today. You don't realize that in the future, they're moving towards legacy, and perhaps quickly through legacy and right off the grid. If you think about technology companies, you know, if you're focused on those, and this is just my humble opinion, I might put Facebook in falling star category. Doesn't mean it's bad. Doesn't mean that the company won't make money, but perhaps it's becoming a falling star and is being replaced by other technologies, other things out there. So there's several ways to look at this. But again, the most important way is to look at it from the standpoint of your organization. What products do we have that are falling stars? Where in the future we can see that customers are going to move to other things. One of the companies that I wrote about in my book, Xerox, it was amazing. In their copier business, they had lines of copiers that were definitely in falling star. They didn't realize that copying was going to be replaced by Adobe Acrobat, PDF files, and Dropbox. That was the new copying business. They just couldn't believe it. And it was funny, I heard an executive say, well, everybody loves a Xerox copier. You can't have a business without a Xerox copier. They didn't realize that they were in that falling star category. Absolutely surprised by it. So it's really interesting. Again, we want to take money out of falling stars unless we can invest them in them and turn them into something better. And that might be possible. We add a feature, we add a pricing strategy. We go away from making DVDs and we go to a subscription, streaming media. Then you might have a different type of investment strategy for a falling star, but you have to recognize it when it's out there. Rising stars. This is my favorite category. This is the one that I think is really interesting. Companies tend to underinvest in rising stars. Why? Well, look to that vertical axis. The strategic importance today is low. Short-term thinking, it's hard to invest in a technology, in a customer, or in a city, or in a product where the strategic importance today is low. But look at that horizontal axis. Tomorrow it's going to be high. Tomorrow, the technology, the product, the initiative is going to be really important. What's tough about the rising star is getting the money there when it's not immediately important. The very innovative organizations can do this, and I think that's why they're innovative. They're able to recognize the rising star, invest in it before it becomes strategically important, knowing that it's going to become strategically important very, very quickly in the future. Rising star technology, rising star products, rising star customers, again, whatever you want to categorize, are the most interesting for grid because that's your future, that's your innovative initiative, but it's also perhaps a grid that requires the most investment with the smallest return. It's very tough, very difficult when you're thinking about investing in a rising star, particularly if you're going to get that investment from the legacy grid. Finally, stars. Stars are certainly the products, the customers, the initiatives, the people, the processes, you name it, whatever you're categorizing. We hope to have a lot of these. The importance today on the vertical grid is high. The importance tomorrow on the horizontal grid is also high. We love stars. Stars are absolutely the thing that a company hopes to get the most of. But it takes money to keep them there. And sometimes stars can start to move towards falling stars. That's very, very difficult. Perhaps, though, there is a falling star that can turn into a star. Yes, that's possible. That can happen. Is it possible for a legacy product to turn into a star? Yes. So I'll give you an example of this, which is really interesting. One of the legacy technologies of the United States Navy is diesel-powered submarines. That's the technology that replaced it was certainly nuclear-powered submarines. So nuclear-powered submarines go to star, diesel-powered submarines go to legacy. However, warfare has changed. Consciousness of perhaps nuclear accidents has risen. And so interestingly enough, and technology has changed. So interestingly enough, diesel power subs can now be built such that they are quiet. They can do the work they need to do under the water very effectively. There's carbon sequestration systems now in these subs. And suddenly what was once a legacy is now turned into a rising star and a star for the United States Navy. So once a legacy, always a legacy is not necessarily true, but you have to be very realistic about that assessment. Uh, you can turn anything into a star, but a star can also turn into anything if not properly managed. Now, what I want to talk to you about now, and I think it's really important and something that you have to think very, very carefully about and very, very deeply about, is the financial aspect of this. So what we've talked about here is very strategic, but what I want to talk to you about now is probably the hardest part of this. Um, I don't think it's very difficult for any rational organization or any rational managers or leaders to go in and maybe do a fair assessment of this. And I've done this for many corporations. I've done it in my career working in consulting with Department of Defense, in DARPA, and other places. You can do this, but the hard part, I think, really gets into moving the money around to really trying to understand how that occurs. So what I want to do now is show you that process, to show you um, how um, how this occurs and why companies have such a tough time with this. So let me get this. Let me get my technology rolling here, and away we go. All right. So one of the things that's interesting here, let's draw out the grid. But now this is the really important part. So really follow me here. So I'm just going to draw out the grid that you just saw. And so if you look at strategic importance today, strategic importance tomorrow. Okay. Here we go. So we can see these things. And here we have legacy. We have our rising star over here. We have our star right here, and then we have falling star over here. Now, again, in the diagram that you saw clear lines, 4 beautiful squares there. Probably, if you really thought about what it looks like, it's probably more of a blurry diagram like this, where you would have these things that are almost not perfectly lined up. It would be more like a sort of a messy diagram, or the boundaries would not be as perfect. You get some fuzziness between the boundaries. The tough thing to do, but what has to be done, is to assess everywhere the amount of money that you're spending. How much money are we spending here? How much money are we spending here? How much money are we spending here? And how much money are we spending here? It really gets into this idea of trying to understand what these initiatives cost us. So if we're looking at products, the products we sell, how much does it cost to manufacture? How much does it cost to sell? How much does it cost to transport? And what profit are we making on that? Or as I like to think about it, contribution. What's flowing back to the company after taxes and overhead? What is the contribution straight to the bottom line of the firm? I always like to think about it from that standpoint. So we really want to get some idea of cost there. The thing that you have to do is to know that we're going to have to move money from here over here. And so if you think about the trail of money, are the things that have to happen here, you're going to have to triage. You're going to have to realize that over here in star and in rising star, that's our future. That's going to be really important. And if we've got all of our money locked over on the left-hand side, we're not going to be successful in taking those rising stars and eventually turning them into stars. However, that said, if we can take a falling star and turn it into a star, we might take some of this money and invest it there. That might be a good investment. Or if I can take a legacy and turn it into a star or a rising star, then I might be willing to put money into that and to make it flow that way. But typically what's going to happen is that we're going to try to take the money and move it from falling star to legacy over to our rising stars, inner stars. This is tough to do. It's tough to do because it really gets into what I think is the hardest strategy. You know, you can talk about doing it and you can put up PowerPoint slides and talk about it from a strategy standpoint. But I think where the rubber meets the road, where the real strategy starts to occur, is when we start to see the movement of money from left to right. And so to make it easy and to simplify this diagram a little bit for you, the real goal here is to move money this way. It's really tough unless you've got new money coming in. You know, if you've got new money that's coming in from outside, then maybe you can start to sustain more. But keep in mind the organizational capacity. What's really interesting about that is even if you start to expand the organization, you sell stock and you go out into the debt markets and you try to find additional capital to hold on to the falling stars and the legacies, but also try to build the rising stars and stars. Organizations still have limited capacity. It's really hard to maintain everything. So it's very difficult. And of course, one of the ways you can start to really generate cash is to vote some of this legacy completely off the island, to let the falling stars go to legacy, maintain perhaps some legacy at lower cost. So what we can do here is say, look right here, we're going to really make an effort to lower the cost of our legacy technology or our legacy products, or we're not going to spend as much on those legacy customers. But the idea is right here in the middle, this flow of money. You can't starve off these guys right here. Your eyes of the organization really have to be right there and right there. You really have to pay attention to those particular products. Typically, they don't. The eyes of the organization are over here and over here. That's not good. We don't want that, but that's typically where you see it happening. So this gives you an idea. It's really important of the dynamics of the organization, of what has to happen there. And as I told you, this is tough. But no innovation can happen, right? And I hope you understand that. You can have the coolest idea that's ever been thought of. You can have the technology, or you can have the innovation that you think is the best of all time. If you can't move the money, then it's not going to happen. It's absolutely not going to happen. So let's go back to our main visual here and let's work through an example. Okay. So I've talked to you about it. I think what will really sell you on the idea and really illustrate it is taking a look at it from the standpoint of an organization that has gone through this, and an organization that I've consulted with. And I'm going to show you a little bit of the behind the scenes of what goes on here. So the example I want to present to you is ESPN. This is a project that I worked on a few years back. And the problem with ESPN is that, well, they're just losing viewership. They're losing revenue The network is a very expensive part of the Disney organization, and it's just not doing well. And typically when you see something like this, it starts to beg for an analysis, such as we're talking about, that there are sacred cows in the organization. There are things that we have fallen in love with that are no longer performing. There are new ideas that we're afraid of, that we need to invest in, and we need to readjust the cost structure. So this was a project that I did for them. Now, when you're going in and talking about sports programming, and for those of you who aren't familiar with ESPN, uh, it's a network dedicated to, well, entertainment and sports programming, but mostly sports programming. And they do everything from hockey to rodeo, to ultimate fighting. You name it, they do it. And so the question becomes, what drives revenue? What is strategic importance? And the way we drove that question, and again, there are many metrics you could use, keeping in mind that I wanted some form of objectivity. I don't want it to be non-data driven. I want it to be data driven, but I don't want to make it so data driven that there's no real analysis. You don't want to just have a chart and say, okay, here's where everything falls, and that be the end of it. You want to discuss it because, again, we're talking about the future. We're talking about what might happen in the future, and we're talking about what's happening right now in terms of strategic importance of the network. So, to provide that objectivity, we settled on a couple of metrics, of what I would call key metrics. Now, again, when I'm doing this exercise for a client, I don't want 21 metrics. You don't want to analyze it so that it's not useful. Really forcing a group of leaders to say, look, what are the 2 or 3 key metrics? Really helps to clear up the exercise. Because again, what you're trying to do here is build a context for discussion so that you can then do strategy. You're not trying to derive strategy through analytics. I think that's a mistake. What we want the analytics to do is help us shape or provide some foundation for filling out this matrix in a responsible way. So here we go, and I'll show you just again some of the very basic data that was gathered here. But what I want to convince you is that, or convince you of, is that this was data driven in a way. Metrics and analytics are used, but we're not using them so much that we take out the decision making. We don't want to do that. So again, take a look at the way this is done. This is just a very, very simple spreadsheet type of format here. And what you've got to do, first of all, is look at sports that they broadcast. And what was done here is to look at the sports family and the actual sport. So notice here, this is a clever way of doing it. In column A, you see basketball, American football, basketball again. So they looked at sport family, and I thought that was clever to do that. And then the specific event in column B. So look at row 2. You've got basketball. That's the sport family. The particular event itself is the NCAA basketball championship. Now, the 2 metrics that we use, the key metrics, and you're going to see them here. Number 1 was viewership. So that's column C. So the idea there is to take a look at the amount of viewers that watch it and the amount of dollars that advertisers pay for the sport. So you're looking at the number of people that watch it, the amount of dollars. Now in column D, which was really interesting, they also added a growth, how that sport was growing. Now the numbers you see there are a little bit disguised. They were more definitive, but I don't want to give out complete information here. So what we did is we put rankings there to kind of melt down those absolute numbers into rankings to compare with each other, with the other sports there. So just consider the numbers there from 0 to 10 to be relative rankings. So you can see that NCAA basketball championship tournament has a ranking of 10 and in column C, and in row 2, column D, a ranking of 10. Vis-a-vis, if you look at Olympics, go to row 10. You can see there today, the eyeballs dollar ranking is 8. In the future, the growth of that would be a 3. So again, a way to look at this, a couple of things here that I want you to notice. Again, we're using data. They're using only a couple of metrics here. Advertising revenue, the number of people that watch the sport, and the growth in advertising revenue and number of people that will watch the sport projected out into the future. And I like the growth rate. The growth rate doesn't bother me so much because it is projected, so that it's not as finite as column C. But I wasn't really bothered by that. So as a consultant, someone doing research and consulting with them, it makes them happy. It's something they wanted to collect, and so that was done. So again, so here's sort of the list of sports and some attempt at the metrics here. What you're going to start to see here, this is just taking what they had in the columns there and using just a little bit of technology here to have that put out into a scatter plot. And again, what you have to do here a little bit is to say, okay, what would be high strategic importance today, high strategic importance tomorrow? What would be a star? What would be a falling star? What would be a legacy? And what might be a rising star, to plot that out and position that grid or those grid lines there such that you get general agreement on the sort of the scatter plot. That wasn't hard to do, to be quite honest with you. There wasn't what I would call a whole lot of disagreement on how those axes fell in the scatter plot. Now, one of the things that you can see just from the scatter plot here, even before we put this into a matrix, is on the bottom right-hand side of the grid, and that's where your rising stars are. There aren't a lot of them. In fact, on that off diagonal, falling star on the top left and rising star on the bottom right, you see a fairly empty set of scatter points there. And that does mean polarization along the main axis, legacy and a lot of star sports for them right now. What I start to wonder, if you've got an organization that has a plot that looks like this, what I start to wonder, and again, you've got to prove it out, but you just kind of wonder it, is that the bottom left hand, that group of legacy sports, they may be spending too much money for that. So for ESPN, they may be spending too much money to broadcast those particular sports, which can be really dangerous given that there are a lot of scatter points down there. There are very few in rising star and very few in falling star. You're in a little bit of a risky situation, particularly if that bottom left-hand grid's costing you a lot of money and it's starving off money to try to find the next rising star or to maintain those stars. Because keep in mind, ESPN has this grid, but so does NBC Sports and other competitors. So you are in heated competition as far as maintaining your portfolio, and they're trying to maintain their portfolio. But again, what I want to show you here is just the jump between getting a listing of sports that they want to categorize, getting some general criteria, and then throwing them out there as your first straw man. Now, again, when I'm working with companies and we do all this data, I'm really careful to say that the reason we did this is to get that first diagram up there. And then we give the leadership, or in this case, the executives that manage those sports, you give them the opportunity to discuss and even to challenge the numbers. And that's good. That's part of a productive process there, is to have some of those executives say, well, I know that the numbers show this, but I believe there's another story that's not being told in the grid. And that's fine. Yeah, certainly as a consultant, as a researcher, I'm willing to allow that. I want that conversation to happen and to take a look at this. Now, you also have the reverse here, where companies don't go through it as objectively as you see here, being very, very objective about it and trying to make those numbers say something. You'll get some clients and some companies that say everything we've got is a star. So what's the big deal? That's impossible. Organizations just aren't built that way. There are always legacy and falling star and rising star assets in a company or customers, whatever you want to categorize. They're just there, and you know that's going to happen. And so, for a company to say, "Well, everything's a star," you just know is a company that's very slow to change. And perhaps not recognizing the world around them. Again, in talking to executives that missed opportunities, you could really see a pattern of overestimating how many stars they had and drastically underestimating how much of their assets were legacy. There's just no question about that. So I think that every executive, every organization has their favored view of this, but maybe the realistic view is not the same. So let's put it in a more digestible diagram. Here we go, throwing these into the investment matrix or into our grid here. And again, this is I think a first cut at it. This is a first look at it. And if you take a look at stars, let's just start there first. NFL regular season plus playoffs. The NFL is a star of stars. However, since this analysis has been done, the NFL has shown signs of moving into falling star. One of the things that's really interesting about NFL, as far as viewership, is it's being replaced by fantasy football. People don't follow their NFL teams anymore. They follow their fantasy teams. And so NFL Red Zone and some other programming options are becoming more popular. The Super Bowl is certainly a star. I don't think you see any surprises there. NCAA basketball tournament, regular season in basketball tends to be a star. FIFA World Cup, absolutely a star. Professional tennis, surprisingly, is a star. It's one of those I didn't expect it. The Major League World Series is a star, but Major League Baseball itself is a falling star to a legacy. Again, we're just seeing some sampling here. The final grid was much more detailed. Let's go to falling stars, things that are falling off. The Winter Olympics. I would put Winter Olympics, Summer Olympics, falling stars with a bullet. I mean, they're going down fast. The slam dunk contest has been a falling star. They can't figure out how to reinvent that. The players don't want to play in it anymore. NBA, X Games, golf. Golf is a falling star simply because every so often Tiger Woods plays well. When he's playing well, it goes to falling star. If he's not playing well, it tends to be a legacy. The legacy sports, NHL hockey overall. However, in some markets, it would be a star. So again, one of the things you start to do there is look at markets as well. Certainly in the northeastern part of the United States and in Canada, NHL is gaining a lot of traction, or has always had a lot of traction. It is gaining traction in places like Nashville, the Carolinas, Tampa Bay. The Tampa Bay Lightning are popular, and now Vegas. It's very interesting. NHL hockey is one that, although it's legacy, the decision was made to put more money into it because they think it might become a rising star. And I think the evidence actually shows that out there. Again, bowling, boxing, Triple Crown, these are all legacy. That doesn't mean you don't broadcast them. It just means that the viewership and the advertising revenue is not there yet. So it's not that these are bad types of sporting events, but I think what you want to make sure is that you're paying the right amount of money for them. Soccer is a potential rising star, but notice here, these are things that might happen. You're hoping that these might be the rising stars. Remember, in the grid, you didn't see a whole lot of rising star in the scatter plots there. Conference championship games for the football have been good rising stars. I think that these are certainly are the two playoff games, and then the championship game have been very, very good rising stars. I don't know that they've broken into star yet. UFC has actually moved into a semi-star category since this is done. UFC may actually cycle this matrix pretty quickly. And again, just because something is in a box at one time doesn't mean it's in that same box when we look down the road. UFC has kind of moved into star. I'm willing to bet UFC moves from star to falling star back to legacy fairly quickly in terms of the sports world. Rugby was an interesting rising star category. A lot of things coming from Europe. Certainly the soccer coming from Europe has been a surprising, I don't say surprising, it's just been a rising star. And so what you got to figure out if you're ESPN is whether you move that into your star category. Now, again, I want to reemphasize and I want to make sure you understand this is a first pass at it. This is an organization that's really trying to understand how this matrix, how their assets fall on these particular dimensions. You can do this for sports, just like ESPN did. You can do it for technologies if you're an IT person. I've had many IT people use this for the technologies in an organization. You can look at it from processes, training programs. HR executives really love this grid because it gives them a chance to take a look at how training occurs, how executive development occurs, compensation systems. I have used this in Department of Defense to categorize everything from the commands themselves to the assets of the Navy that touch the water, to the aviation assets of the Army. It can be used for anything. It's a tough exercise. I would say this, of all the things that you do in innovation, this may be the toughest because it forces you to look at where we are today, where we want to be in the future, and what investment is going to take us to that desired state. So it's very, very tough. So now you've seen the third leg of innovation. We had intelligence, we had design, and now the hardest, choice. But you know, it may be the most important lap of the innovation mile. In my observation of companies, the ones that were able to do this very, very well were able to not only stay ahead of the competition, they were able to define and actually make the rules for the new frontiers that were out there. So it's really, really important. It's never talked about. It's always what I call the top line part of innovation that's talked about. Coming up with ideas, finding creative people. That's all great. I've certainly enjoyed that part of it myself. But as I did the research, as I thought about my own experiences, and I wrote this book, and I wrote papers about it, I realized that perhaps making good investment decisions was the most important piece of it, the one that the companies could not do, that came up with the ideas and saw the changes. They just couldn't move the money. So there you have it, investment triage, taking dollars and creating strategy. That's it for tonight's broadcast. Listen, always remember, stay on the solution side of the equation, and I'll see you next time. Take care.